Today's episode of Pushing Beyond the Obvious is brought to you by Skillshare, an online learning platform with over 18,000 plus classes on business, marketing, technology, and many more. Get 2 months of Skillshare for free at rmukeshgupta.com/learn. Welcome to Pushing Beyond the Obvious, and I am your host Mukesh Gupta, author of the world's first business poem, Your Startup Mentor. This is a show where I bring you ideas and insights from some of the best minds in the world so that you can be a better entrepreneur and grow your business. One thing that I have seen common in all successful entrepreneurs is their ability to constantly learn and push boundaries. This is something that I constantly try to do as well. I learn a lot from our guests. I listen to a lot of podcasts, read a lot of books, and I also learn something from Skillshare every month. I have been personally using Skillshare now for more than a year and have learned so much. One of the courses that I recommend to every entrepreneur to learn from is the one taught by Simon Sinek. He teaches a class on presentation essentials and is so very good. While you're there, you could also try out the class that I teach, which is on how to rock your next brainstorming session. You can find my class at rmukeshgupta.com/brainstorm and get 2 months of Skillshare for free at rmukeshgupta.com/learn. Hi Harold, thanks for taking time and talking to us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks very much, Mukesh.
I must say that I came to know about you from the blogs that you write. I've been a regular reader of what you put out, and I must say that I have learned quite a bit from the blog posts. So thanks a lot for creating all that content. So before we kind of move on, can I ask you to introduce yourself, the work that you do, and how all of that has resulted in what you do right now?
Okay, my name is Harold Jarche. I live in New Brunswick, Canada, which is on the far east coast of Canada. I have been an independent consultant for almost 15 years now. My previous life, I spent the first half of my career actually in the Canadian military, and I served as an infantry officer, hospital administrator, and then later as a training specialist, which is kind of how I got into my current field. I designed flight simulation and developed a training for pilots of helicopters and the technicians as well. When I retired from the military 20 years ago, I worked for a university agency called the Center for Learning Technology. So this would have been in the late 1990s. And it was the time when e-learning was exploding and everyone was talking about the potential of the information highway and those kinds of things. And so that's where I really got immersed into technology because I don't have a tech background. I have a degree in history and a degree in education. And I got into that through the university, and then I worked for a small .com e-learning company, and they got rid of me in 2003, and the next day I started my freelancing life, which I've been doing since June of 2003. And so since then, that 15-year period, one of the things that I did was I got into blogging. And blogging and PKM and everything really kind of get mixed together. And that's, I actually have this little cartoon by Hugh MacLeod that I show, and it says about blogging in your underwear, and it shows this little blogger, and it says blogging gave me everything. And I have to admit, I'm not in my underwear today, but blogging was really gave me everything that I am professionally, because it allowed me to connect with people with a worldwide audience. And PKM, Personal Knowledge Mastery, which we're going to talk about in detail, I think today, is a framework which puts that into sense, and it's something that I've been working on for quite a while. It actually started, so 2003, I find myself without work. I live in Sackville, New Brunswick, population 5,000, and I'm 1,000 kilometers from the nearest major center, 1,000 kilometers from Boston or from Montreal. So it's a long way to go. And here I am in an area that's relatively economically depressed. So the big industries here are forestry, fishing, resource extraction, and for our 2 months of summer, we have a lot of tourism. Not the kind of work, not really knowledge work intensive, and no large companies are here. So one of the things, so again, this is 2003. I'm taking a look at, I'm playing with blogs at this time, and I'm reading a lot. I'm reading voraciously. Other people are blogging. I actually feel like I'm getting into blogging late. My current website at jarche.com has been a blog since 2004. So the period 2003 to 2004, I'm trying to figure these things out. I'm lucky I get a couple of contracts. I've got a little bit of work, and I start getting into the blogging routine a little bit because I figure that I've got to do something, and it's cheap, right? It costs me almost nothing. And I connect to several people who really inspired me. One is Lilia Efimova. Lilia still blogs at mathemagetic.com. She's now talking about unschooling her children. So she's homeschooling her children, and she talks about that currently. But back in 2003, Lilia was doing her doctoral thesis, and she was doing her doctoral thesis on knowledge exchange between professionals using blogs. And so she developed the personal knowledge management framework. Now, PKM, personal knowledge management, had something that has been discussed in KM, in knowledge management circles, for quite a while. And there were a lot of people discussing it, or a number of people discussing it in the early 2000s. So Lilia really inspired me with her frameworks, and she was blogging her doctoral dissertation, and actually getting in trouble for that because that was a bad thing at the time. Another person was Denham Gray, and Denham doesn't blog anymore. I'm not too sure what he's up to, but he worked for IBM, and he talked a lot about taking control of our knowledge, sharing, consumption, and things. And then the third person was Dave Pollard, and Dave had at the time was the chief knowledge officer for Ernst & Young, and then he went independent, and he was a prolific writer. He was writing about a 10,000 word essay almost every day. It was hard enough just to read what he wrote. I don't know when he found the time to do the writing. But those three really inspired me. And what PKM started off as was needed to be scratched. So here I was, basically in the middle of nowhere. I'm a stay-at-home mother, my wife, two young children, and very little work in the local area. And I've got to do something. I also have to stay ahead of the game because, look, I'm a consultant, and as a consultant, of course, you're supposed to know everything. But the thing is, I couldn't really afford to travel to big conferences. The Canadian dollar had tanked against the US dollar, so it was really expensive for me to travel to any US-based conferences. And so where do I go? I go online. And I start connecting to other people, and that's so again inspired by these three folks. And I thought, well, I'm going to just start, articulating what I'm thinking and putting it on my blog. So in 2004, nobody's reading my blog. It's just for me, and I play with this PKM framework. It's very much it's like 5% of my time or less. It's just one of those things, and I'm just putting it up there, and I have different models and things, and I'm sticking it here and there, and it's more like, oh, at least I know where I can find it later if I want to go after it. And back in about mid-2004, I was going through a very quiet period, didn't have much work, so that meant that cash flow was kind of dying. My wife was getting stressed, as I was, and one of the things that I was doing, so I was writing a lot on the blog. I think it was May 2004, I think I wrote something like 58 blog posts, but that's because Twitter didn't exist. So it was the only place where you could stick stuff. And my wife sees me doing all this kind of stuff, and I'm not working, I'm not getting paid. And she said, "This is crazy." She said, "If you give away all your knowledge, right, nobody's going to hire you." And I said, I think, and this was based on stuff that people like Cory Doctorow were writing about, was that I think that my problem is not people stealing my knowledge, it's people actually knowing who I am. But now that's a leap of faith. That really is. It's kind of like, I think that if I stick the stuff out there, that maybe somehow in the long run, this is going to come back to me. I'm going to get some recompense for it. And now here we are in 2018. I'm an international speaker. I have clients in multiple countries. I run online workshops about PKM, as well as many other things. So I think in the long run, that has been a self-fulfilling prophecy. In 2004, it wasn't obvious, and it also hasn't exactly been an easy path going on that. But I've definitely learned a lot about the framework, and we can talk about the framework in a bit more detail. But it's definitely been a work in progress, and I've been inspired by a lot of other work in different fields like complexity theory, particularly the Cynefin framework that Dave Snowden has developed. Other work from folks like Esko Kilpi in Finland. So it's really morphed over time to become this sense-making framework. So in essence, so like what is PKM? Like I've changed it from personal knowledge management to personal knowledge mastery. Now, one reason was marketing, because I wanted to be different. So it's only Harold who's talking about personal knowledge mastery. Okay, I haven't trademarked it or anything like that, but at least when people see that, it's that might be what that Harold guy is talking about. And so that's been a core part of it. But the other thing is that I really looked at it as it's a discipline. It's like Zen or
It's
meditation
a
or something
practice,
like that.
basically.
It's a practice, and everybody's practice is different. There are certain principles. The framework for me is a sense-making framework, so we can talk the same language and use the same terms. But really, what it is that how do you take control and manage the experiences, the information, the sources of knowledge that pass by you every day? How do you make sense of them? How do you internalize that? How does that affect your actions? And then how do you share that appropriately? Where, when, and with whom are you going to do that? And feel free to jump in and direct me in certain
Yeah,
ways.
so
Or
I think you've already started the discussion around personal knowledge mastery. I think that is what I wanted to discuss today as well. The reason why I reached out to you, and I think it is valid and valuable information for my audience, is also because today we are living in a world where there is abundance of information, right? There's just too much information, and it is getting more and more difficult to, number one, consume this information. Number two, whatever you have consumed, there needs to be a framework for us to internalize and apply it to our own need or in our own situation. Now I see all around me that there is something interesting that someone is doing. I go quickly read about it, and then I find something else interesting. I go there, and I'm jumping from one place to the other without, or rather with very minimal internalization of information. So, and that is becoming the case not just with me, but with almost everyone that I know of in my circle as well. That is the reason why when I saw that, I've been reading about the blogs that you've been writing about, personal knowledge mastery, the framework that you're talking about, and I felt that, if we are able to use this framework to make sense of whatever it is that we are getting as inputs, and are able to internalize it and apply it to our very context, so the same information for me may mean something else, for someone else may mean something else, but as long as we are able to internalize it and apply to our context and learn from it, I think that is where the biggest results is going to be as well. And not just personally, I think organizationally also, we are getting into an age where there is just too much data being created. So if we can first use this for our personal use, and then somehow have a framework built for teams, and from teams to organizations, I think that is going to be the differentiator for a lot of organizations to do well in the future. That's the reason why I said it's important that we talk about this. So before we kind of jump the gun, can you tell us what, according to you, is this personal knowledge mastery, and explain the framework a little bit so that we can go from there?
Okay, and I also want to circle back on you're talking about teams and organizations because it does connect. But personal knowledge mastery, one thing that I learned, and this was a very interesting thing that Dave Pollard, whom I mentioned earlier, who his blog is How to Save the World, and Dave, when he was taking a look at what was called a personal information management system when he was at Ernst & Young back in I think the 90s or maybe even in the 80s, and he was asking people, said, we're building a knowledge base. And he went and he personally interviewed people all over the company. And he said, well, what would you like to have in the knowledge base? We're going to build this wonderful knowledge base so people can share and all that kind of stuff. And almost to a person, they all responded, I don't care. I don't care what's in your knowledge base. I don't care what's in the organizational knowledge base. I need to deal with my problems. And in those days, when we all had these big CRT monitors, I don't know if you remember that, and we all had sticky notes all the way around the side that were our sort of our aid memoir about, oh, this is how I get into here, and got to put another sticky note there, and that's who I contact here, right? That's all they cared about was what was on their desktop, right? And that has informed me, I guess, and I've reflected upon that, is that if you're going to make some change, change starts within. So so PKM is about individuals, but the value proposition for the organization is huge. And again, we can get into that. So you ask, what is the P? So the PKM framework is 14 years in development for me, and a number of years ago, I was lucky and I came up with 3 words to explain it. And I knew that it worked because it stuck with a client. A client repeated it back to me. And basically, it's seek, sense, share. So seek out not just information, but people and sources of knowledge, make sense of it somehow, and then share. And it's connected to this 3-circle model or the Perpetual Beta model, which was inspired by work that Lily Efimova had done. And you take a look at these 3 overlapping circles, is that we all work in some type of a work team, a project team, whether it's temporary or full-time job, it doesn't make any difference. And that's where we work, and that's where we get stuff done. We also, for the most part, have social networks. There are very few people who don't have a social network. And that social network can be a church, it can be a community, it can be the fellow cricket players. It doesn't really, I'm a cyclist, so I have my cycling community, things like that, or my cycling network. And then we have this space sort of in between social networks and these work teams, and they're called communities of practice. And Etienne Wenger has done a lot of work on that and really, wrote the defining treatise on what communities of practice are. But basically, a community of practice, the way I define a community of practice is you know that you're in one if it changes your practice. So community of practice is not a social network because they're kind of loose. And it's not where you're getting work done with your boss and with your coworkers and you have deadlines and things like that. A community of practice is where you self-identify as we're all project managers and we're going to share things and we're going to help each other out. And this is where I can throw out an idea and not get shot down. Whereas if I throw out an idea on something like Twitter, who knows? The trolls could pounce on me. It's happened personally, and and you just have to have a thick skin. But if you really want people to share a bit more intimate type things, you need a safe place to do that, and that's what these communities are. And I think that work in the future, or even currently, is this dance between social networks, sort of the big and loose, communities of practice, which are they have loose ties and they have strong ties, and then our work teams, which are mostly strong ties, and more the work that we're doing together is complex. So if you think of sort of like an onion or 3 circles, one inside the other, the big circle are our social networks. The middle circle are our communities of practice, and then inside that are our work teams, and then we've got ourselves as well. And the way that I see it is in terms of seek, sense, share, is that really what we're doing is that we're breathing in from our social networks ideas and stuff. We're filtering it hopefully through our communities of practice. And if you're not a member of a community of practice, I think that everybody from entrepreneur to working in a company is at a loss, because you need a place to filter that stuff through a trusted network, and then breathing in, doing the work, and then over time breathing that back out, say, oh, we did this new work. Interestingly, I may share it with my community of practice, and then later share it out. So it's breathing in, breathing out. But the thing is, we only have one head. We only have one brain. So we are in all those three virtual and real spaces at any given time. But there are different behaviors necessary within each one. So how do I build a diverse social network, knowledge network using, let's say, something like Twitter? Right. So that in terms of the specifics of PKM, that's one of the types of things is building a diverse knowledge network. How can I map that network and see whether I have diversity? Do I have people from other countries, from other cultures, from other perspectives, older than me, younger than me? How, am I getting a good diversity of opinions and perspectives on things that matter to me? And then the same thing with my communities is that am I engaging in my communities of practice? Am I actually pushing hard enough to try to change my practice? Am I experimenting with new things? This comes from complexity as well, is that to understand a complex system, you actually have to engage with the system. And it's in engaging with the system that you learn. It's that whole notion of perpetual beta. We're going to put a beta product out there. We're going to see what happens. We're going to change it based upon the feedback and engaging with the complex system. So again, that's the seeking, then the sense making, and the sharing. And I have been running workshops and doing training and advising numbers of companies who've used the PKM framework. And the sense making is the tough part. So I can go out there and I can get information here, there, all that kind of stuff, right? And I can stick it together and I can put it in social bookmarks. I can use Scoop It, all that kind of stuff. But what the heck do I do with that? And for me, blogging is a big part of my sense-making process. I enjoy writing, but I was not a good writer. I was a really bad writer all the way. And my early blog posts are not very good. But actually, over time, I became a much better writer. I was able to put my ideas together. So for me, blogging is part of my sense making. Perhaps I think for you, perhaps podcasting is part of your sense making, having these interviews, right? So this is how you are taking. That's an interesting idea. Let's do a podcast. Okay. Not everybody can do podcasts or blogs. There's an interesting example of this woman who every day she drives home from work, and she actually talks to herself about everything that happened during the day. That for her is a way in which she mentally makes sense and codifies it. And then again with sharing, sharing is about being appropriately sharing, where, when, with whom. And if you're working in a company, then you also have things about confidentiality, intellectual property, all those things that are very important. But as a practice, the thing about it is that you're not going to get better unless you do it, and you may make some mistakes. But it's better to make the mistakes perhaps in a community of practice than it is to do it out on the open social web. And there again, for companies and for individuals, is that do you have a community of practice? Can you find some? In most cases, they exist, but we just don't know them. And it's to find them, to reinforce them, and to support them. I'm an active member of 4 communities of practice right now. One is only 4 people, and the other one is about 80 people. And we do different things. But where we communicate for the most part is within closed environments. We're using Slack, we're using Socialcast, we're using closed WordPress spaces, and they're invitation only. And that means that there's a certain level of trust.
I think this is an important aspect that I would like to delve a little more deeper in, because I think, as you rightly said, the most difficult part for most of us is around sense making.
Yes.
Now, so we have social networks. I mean, entrepreneurs also have their social networks, other fellow entrepreneurs who come together. But what you're talking about when it comes to communities of practices, this closed, really, space where you are open, you trust people around you. So how do you find a community like that? If you can't find it, how do you go about setting up a community like that? Maybe, if you could give an example of one of those
Yeah.
4 communities that you're talking about and explain as to how that came about. I think that will give people an idea about how do you go about creating those communities of practice.
I think you can find communities of practice a lot easier if you have a diverse and large social network or social networks, right? So because you're going to be talking to different people, and I have, I don't know, 16,000 followers on Twitter. If I post something out and say, hey, does anybody know anything about, then the chances are that I might get a response on that and say, I'm looking for a community of practice based on this. Somebody might refer me to someone else, right? So having a larger social network makes that easier. Whether you have that or not, so there's 2 ways you can do it. One is that you can find one that exists. And so my tightest community of practice was started by a gentleman by the name of Jay Cross. He passed away a couple of years ago. And Jay wrote the seminal book on informal learning. And one of the things that he talked about was that, you need to have, it's all about collaboration, cooperation, working together and things like that. He was a freelancer. And he said, this is crazy. I'm talking about collaboration and I work alone. And so he contacted Jane Hart in the UK, and then later Clark Quinn, who's in California, and then myself, and we wound up and we created basically an umbrella company, which really, it's a company, but we don't use it as a company. It's I call it more of a self-help group called the Internet Time Alliance. And so there's still four of us in the Internet Time Alliance, and we actually just use a Skype chat, and that's how we keep in touch with each other. But we do all kinds of things in that, kind of like, hey, I'm working for Company X. Anybody ever worked for them before? Someone says, yeah. What should I quote in a bid? They want me to do this, and this. And one of my partners would come back and say, well, this is what I got paid to do it. Okay, cool, that's all right. So that's not the kind of thing I'm going to put on Twitter. Right. And the thing is that we've been together since 2009. So we know each other, we trust each other, we've worked together. But so again, this is so this was one that came together because one person invited another person, and put everybody together, right? There's another group that I belong to called Change Agents Worldwide. It's run by Simon Terry out of Melbourne, Australia. And that one is where it's a number of social networks that kind of came together with different people inviting folks in. But it's this is a different community because there's two major types of people in it. There are people what is known as solo change agents. So that's like me, a freelancer. And there are people as enterprise change agents. These are people who want to change the way work is done, but they're inside their companies. So this is a safe place in which people from inside companies can talk about what's happening inside the company, and it's locked down, or ask advice, right? It's not really a place where we exchange services. It's more about each learning from each other. For me, it's wonderful because I sort of dive into companies and then go back out, but I have this thread of people working in a number of different companies that I can talk to, and I can say, oh, that's what's happening right now with this kind of stuff. So I have this touch, and with 80 some people, I don't know everybody. Let's say there's maybe 20 that I know, but I know that somebody knows somebody else and trusts them. So in this case, it's a mix of strong social ties and weaker social ties, but it's all within the context of a trusted environment. And so that was one that was created. Susan Strupsky out of the U.S. originally created it, and then it's grown and has changed over time. And there's forming, storming, norming, performing, the standard stuff that happens within groups, and there's tensions and stuff like that happens. But the nice thing is it happens within family, right? So other people don't know about it. So finding one, if you can. Make your own. That's why I advise to people is that, if you really have a need for a community of practice and you can't find one, why don't you start one? I've just started one. It's not even a community of practice yet. So one of the things that I did as a blogger is I went out and I started saying I was going to lock my site down and make it a paid site because I've written 3,000 posts. I figured it's time to get some money out of this. I decided against that because what I was advised by members of my community of practice. I asked my trusted networks, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And they said, the problem with the lockdown community is it's hard for the rest of the members to share. I'm going like, oh, that's not very good, is it? And so I called what's called my coffee club. I said, look, for $5 a month, you can join my coffee club and you're supporting my blogging. And then so I think I've got 12 people right now on that. And I decided, well, why don't I create a little safe space where we can talk? So I've created a little private WordPress site. And if you're paying me $5 a month, you can come in here. And then we're doing monthly video meetings to discuss anything anybody wants to talk about. Because again, a lot of these people don't belong to other communities, online communities of practice that for their profession. I said, we can talk about complexity. We can talk about PKM. I'm not here to sell. We're here to talk. I'm here to facilitate or listen. And so that's the most nascent. I mean, I only set that site up a couple of weeks ago. So we're just sort of figuring that one out. So, and the thing with communities is that they live and they die. A community, there's a time when it's time to shut down a community.
Right.
You know, your social network, the bonds change over time, but sort of the network, I mean, it's always changing. You know, the same thing with work. Your work
Yeah.
team.
So
Sometimes
you
your work.
evolve as well, right? So you personally evolve, and there are times probably when you need to find a different community of practice than what you have been in so far, because maybe your
Definitely.
focus has changed, your priorities have changed, so your need for a different kind of practice arises, so you move into a different kind of community. That also happens. So I think you mentioned about it a little earlier, which is about, how do you make sense? In your case, you blog. I blog as well. So I tell my wife, I mean, I've been blogging for almost 3 years, not as long as you have been. I have about 600 posts on the
Yeah,
blog.
that's
I
that's
write it
pretty
for.
good.
I write for myself, so
Yeah.
a lot of people ask me, where do you find time to, you work full time in an organization, you do podcasting, you do blogging, you are active on all the different social networks. Where do you find time? I think for me, the biggest reason why I continue to blog and do these podcasts is for my personal learning as well. Because every time I talk to someone, I learn myself, and in this conversation I'm learning, as well as in this process there are few other people who are also learning along with me. And there are times when audience come back and asks me, okay, you had this conversation, you could have asked this question to the guest, or based on whatever you had a conversation, can you tell me what did you understand from this, because I was a little confused. And that gives me an opportunity to again revisit the conversation, and also based on my own understanding of what conversation we had, to try and explain that to them, to my audience, that okay, based on what my understanding is, this is what it meant. And the reason why I'm touching upon this is, not everyone has the opportunity to maybe do a podcast or write on a regular basis. So what else have you seen work when it comes to sense making?
Well, first of all, I agree with you on the personal side. I've had a number of companies approach me and technology companies who want to develop a PKM system. And the P is a capital P in personal knowledge mastery, is that because if it's not personal to you, if it's not intrinsically motivated, you're not going to continue doing it, which is why everyone has to find their own method, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's absolutely critical. So what are the other sense making ones? There's someone who's actually been sort of pushing the PKM envelope. Her name is Helen Blunden. She's in Melbourne. And she is probably the best practitioner of PKM that I know. So I've known Helen for a number of years. She's taken my workshops. And one of the things that she was using was Snapchat. And how and I think might have been using Vines before that. These are things that I don't really understand that much. I haven't really gone deep into them, but she's really shown how tools like Snapchat, to again very different type of tool from blogging or
Yeah.
microblogging on Twitter, is part of that. Curation. A lot of people are doing curation, in which they're curating for an audience. So that could be another way of doing the sense making. I have a friend of mine, Paul Prinsloo. So Paul teaches at the University of South Africa, and he's an omnivore online. So he's reading and bringing in stuff, and he's a blogger as well. But one of the things that he does, Paul gets up early in the morning. He's usually up around 5 a.m. And from 5 to 6 or so, as he goes through his feeds, he checks things out, and he curates them, and he puts them into an email, and he sends them to any of his colleagues who are interested in this, because a number of his colleagues are not doing this, are not, they don't have RSS feeds or aggregators or anything like that set up. So he's providing that sort of personal aspect to it. And so I think that, that definitely in terms of sense making is, so how can I make sense for myself, but perhaps put it into the context of my work or a smaller group, so that I feel like I would be letting everybody down if I don't do this. So one of the things, I started on Twitter 2007, I think it was, and the first year about, as I was going, I saw I had all these tweets and all these favorites and likes and things like that, and I asked myself, going like, I'm spending all this time on Twitter, but what am I doing with it? So I created this, what I call Friday's Finds. So every second Friday now, I started every first Friday. But every second Friday, I go through everything that I've clicked on the like button, and usually it's 50 to 100 posts, and I force myself to go through them, to read them, and say, oh, that's interesting, that's interesting, and then I write a blog post of maybe 5 or 10 of what I think are important. Sometimes a theme comes out of those. Where that adds value. So I've done the grazing on Twitter. And I've found some way of highlighting the good stuff. So the only option in that case is the like button. Yeah. Then I've created a routine where every 2 weeks I go through it. Then I've written a blog post, right, which highlights it and puts the permalinks in there, and it's in my database, on my website, my server, those kinds of things. And what I've done now is that I have over 300 of these, and it's become an interesting searchable database. So I use WordPress. So when I go into the administrator mode, I can search by category. So I just search in my Friday's finds, and I can search for a word or a term, let's say leadership, and I can find stuff that's been written not about me or not by me. Right? And so this now becomes a wonderful little knowledge management tool. Right? So I've added, but relatively simple process. Again, all I'm doing during the day is I'm just clicking like.
Yeah.
And then every 2 weeks, I'm going through it. And that reflective time is kind of like, why the heck did I make what? I didn't favorite that. That's of no interest. Right? And again, we're really good at seeing patterns. Is it when you've got 100 what you think are random things, and you start going through and say, hey, all 3 of those are all related. I'm going to write, this post is going to be about, collaboration, right? Because all these things were about collaboration. So there's another sense-making way of doing it. So when I run my workshops, I try to give lots of different ideas and tools and things like that. And my colleague Jane Hart, who has her blog is c4lpt.co.uk. So she has the biggest learning and development blog in the UK. And one of the things that she does every year is that she asks people, what tools do you use for your professional learning? And then she posts this top tools. I think she gets about 5,000 respondents, and she hand curates all, make sure that they're real responses from real people from multiple feeds. And so there she has 100 to 200 tools. And one thing, here's a suggestion is, okay, what tools do you use? Okay, I use Twitter, I use LinkedIn. I use it. Okay, go down this list and find one tool that looks interesting and use it for 30 days, right? And then see whether or not, and then write about your experience and share it. So I think we also constantly have to be pushing that. So what can you do is that, you can use a human focus, talk to other people. You can use a tool focus, try a new tool, because a tool is like a language and it makes you think differently. I mean, I remember when Twitter was only 140 characters, like, how the heck do I say that in 140 characters? Now it's too easy. Yeah. 280, come on.
Yeah, I know. So I think I get it. So ultimately, if you look at all of this, I think one theme that comes across very, very clearly when it comes to sense making is, irrespective of how you do it, whether you talk to yourself in your car, whether you curate stuff, whether you write a blog post about it, whether you use different tools, whether you use personal networks, I think what is common across all of this is your ability to give attention and how do I put it? It's active attention. That is if you understand what I mean.
Like mindfulness, yes.
Mindfulness, yeah. So that's probably the word I was searching for. You need to be mindful about whatever it is, the process that you're using, so that it is not just a fleeting, you just go through an article like in a few seconds, just scroll through them. It's not just that, but it's a little more deeper than that. As long as we are able to do that, irrespective of how or what tool or what process we use, I think that is what helps in sense making, is what is the sense that I get from what you said. So then comes the sharing part, right? So why is sharing so important? I've read quite a bit. I've made sense out of it. But why is it that I need to share it with someone in order to really, master or internalize whatever I have learned?
Well, I think that we can honestly say that none of us are as smart as all of us, right? Is that there are many things that we don't know individually, and that that there is knowledge and wisdom beyond us. We know that. But Imagine living in a network or a community where nobody shares, and that over time, that network gets more stupid. There's a very interesting case of the Aboriginal people in Australia. And a number of years ago, way back when it was at I think the end of the last ice age, is that Tasmania got disconnected from the rest of Australia. And anthropologists had looked at development from that time on. So the community in the number of people living in modern day Tasmania was much smaller than the rest of Australia. And the Aboriginals in Australia continued to share their technology and their knowledge, and that's when they went on walkabout. They would go from one village or one community to another. There was intermarrying between them. What they found was that the Tasmanian group over the years actually lost knowledge and became dumber. They lost technology, they lost know-how, they lost and they didn't have the critical mass to continue to adapt and to grow. So they actually went downhill because they didn't have the diversity of knowledge and multiple perspectives for them to grow as a society. So you can see the same thing as if you go a country that has a really poor education system in which only the elite get educated. Right. Well, over time, the elite are going to, oh, yeah, we have good education. We know everything and all that kind of stuff. But if it's a democracy or maybe not a democracy, is that if you have an uneducated community that you're living in, they might make bad decisions. They might vote for a demagogue. They might, I mean, these kinds of things have happened in history, so I'm told. So when I talk about leadership, and I mean leadership in general, is that in my perspective, is that leadership is helping make the network smarter. So the network can make better decisions, so the network then gives back to me. So the more intelligent, diversified, collaborative, cooperative community that I live in, then the better chances up for my own prosperity, intellectually, spiritually, physically, economically. All those are going to be good. So that's part of the social contract. So the social contract is that I'm learning from all these sources of information, and I have to give back. But you don't have to give back reciprocally. You find what's the way in which you can do that. But it also is a bit self-centered. It's self-centered in terms of I want to live in a better place. I want to have deep conversations with people about things that I'm passionate about, right? So again, me connecting with you and being connected globally means I can talk to you about you. You know what personal knowledge mastery is. I walk down the street in my little community here. You know, there's 2 people that know about it, and one hosts my website, and the other one I have a glass of wine with, and we talk about these things, right? So that's my community here. It's tiny, but I have a global community to talk about that. But if I had not shared, I would not be getting anything back.
Correct. And I also think that, sharing probably is also important, because by the very act of sharing, I think we are also, in a way, being very mindful about what we are sharing as well. And once you share publicly something, I think you're more committed to understand that a little more than you would otherwise. So, for example, if I'm writing a blog about what our discussion is, I'm sure that I would have learned a little more than just having a conversation and just moving on.
Well,
Um,
articulating our thoughts, I
yeah,
think,
correct.
becomes that's the discipline. I mean, that's where writing is good, because writing forces you to think this through. I think also talking about it as a public speaker is
Yeah.
that when I present something on the stage and there are 500 people, afterwards I might think I could have
Done.
maybe done that a little bit better, but only because I was forced to be up there and do it.
Yeah, and also, I also believe that, you learn more by teaching stuff to someone else, because, that also forces you to not only understand, but also internalize and personalize whatever you've learned and express it in your own words rather than the words of someone who had actually originally created the content, because, there is very few people that can claim to really, really create original, in quotes, content. So that also, I think, is important, and sharing gives that possibility to us as well. So you
Sure.
briefly mentioned about perpetual beta, right? So
Mhm.
explain what you mean by perpetual beta, and in this entire context of PKM, how does that fit into?
So perpetual beta was a term that I came across a number of years ago. It's not original to me, and it's used in a number of other cases. But the idea of perpetual beta is perpetual change, or if you think about a beta release, is that it's not quite ready. So in terms of my blog posts, they're in perpetual beta because I call it they're half baked ideas. It's not a fully edited book or anything like that. The other thing about perpetual beta is that when you're dealing with complex systems or complex problems, is if you, according to the Cynefin framework, is that to deal with complexity, you have to what is known as probe, sense, and respond. You have to probe by doing something to engage the system. It's only through engaging the system that you can make sense of it, and then you respond. But those probes have to be small enough so that you don't want to commit the whole company or your whole self to doing something that way. And then you have to continuously experiment. When I talked to Dave Snowden about this, I said, this probe sense respond is good. I like the notion of experimentation, but, how do you know if you're experimenting enough? Oh, he says pretty simple. He said, if you're not getting at least a 50% failure rate, you're not experimenting hard enough. I went, well, okay, that's good. I mean, how many companies do you know like that? Most entrepreneurs are probably way above 50% failure rate. I know I am. Um, so I think that's definitely part of it. And I don't know if I forgot the other part of the
No, no,
question.
I think I also feel that, perpetual beta is also as relevant to ourselves as human beings as well, because I feel that, we are never fully evolved, so we are in the process of evolution as we go along every day. So I think perpetual beta in that case also is very relevant for me.
Yeah, I came across something. I can't remember where it is, and I'll see if I can find it and send it to you afterwards for the post show notes. But they were looking at change in organizations and the people who were open and receptive to doing new things. And what they found was that dinosaurs, as they called them in the company, they became dinosaurs after 4 years. So anybody with more than 4 years of seniority was really more of a hindrance than a help to any type of transition. So I think the perpetual beta is making sure that we don't turn ourselves into dinosaurs. I mean, you think about it. You think about the old days is that I could go and I could get my degrees, I could get a PhD, and then I could sit at a university for the rest of my life and teach based upon that. Now, I might write some papers, I might do another book, I might collect a little bit more, but basically I'm just, I am who I am, and I'm going to then now I'm going to disseminate and spout the rest of my life. And now, you get the half-life of companies is very short. You've got, they're even talking about the demise of Facebook already. And so we have to adapt. And, luckily I've done that. In the military, I had 3 careers. I'm on my 3rd one post-military now. And inside my own company, I'm probably on iteration, I don't know, X to the nth degree or something like that. So again, constantly changing different things. And I think, and the thing is that, again, entrepreneurs and freelancers, they get this intuitively.
They're forced as well,
People,
right? So if they don't, they,
yes,
they go out of existence.
exactly. And so, well, for a number of years, a little bit less now, is that particularly when I was on LinkedIn, is I would get an invitation from somebody to connect, somebody I kind of knew perhaps, and it happened the day that they lost their job. Uh, so I was actually working with a client when the company shut down their office. So 250 people let go. And so I'm dealing with my client, and we're actually I'm working. It's a knowledge sharing collaboration internal project. And she said, well, look, what do I do? I said, okay, well, how long have you been at the company? She said 17 years. Okay, let's map your network. So I went with her and we mapped out her network, and her professional network was all within the company. And then she had her personal network, which was her child, her husband, her local community, and stuff like that. She had no professional network outside the company.
Oh man.
Right now, as a freelancer, it's easy to have things outside the company because the company's one. But if you look at it from a company perspective, from a large company perspective, and if you believe that the knowledge inside the company is less than the knowledge outside the company, then having employees who are not engaged outside getting other ideas are actually not supporting the company at all. Now, from the personal side, is it the better, the more dynamic, the more diverse my professional social network, if I lose my job, that network becomes my social safety net. So it's a good thing for me, but it's not bad for the company either.
Either.
And that is a bit of the dichotomy, because companies sometimes they'll say, well, this is all great for for the employee, but what's it doing for us? We want them to focus on the job at hand. I said, well, you don't know what the job at hand is going to be in 2 years. You've got
True.
to be out there figuring that stuff out. So
True.
that is the big challenge in working with companies. So I've worked with companies like Carlsberg. We put PKM into their leadership program, with Domino's Pizza as well. Some companies get it. And luckily, those are my clients, because the ones who don't get it would never hire me.
So I've been working on an idea as well, which is to create a perpetual education network. So gone are the days, I think, where you go to a college, get a degree, and then maybe 3, 5 years down the line, maybe do an executive course. Maybe 3, 4 years down, your company allows you to go and do some course, or brings in an external consultant, and you learn something. I think now the time is going to be where you continuously learn over a period of time, almost every year. So which means that the education industry needs to adapt to that kind of a need as well. So one of the projects that I'm hoping to launch this year, I mean, this is the first time I'm talking publicly about it, which is to launch a kind of a educational institution where you pay a membership fee, and you come back every year, 2 times to 3 times every year, and you do whatever course you want to do. You create your different network, because every time you come, the cohort is different, so you build a network, and depending upon what you want to do at that phase of life, you can do a leadership course, you can do a technology coding kind of a work, you can come and do something, learn something about marketing, you can come learn something about, let's say, design, you can come learn, do some creative stuff. So as long as you can continue to come every 4 months for a period of, let's say, 3 to 4 days. It is mandatory. You have to come for 3 to 4 days every 4 months, and you pick whatever topic you want to learn at that point in time. But the idea is that you come back every time, every 4 months or so, and learn something new, and go back with a new set of friendship, new set of professional network. Now I'm right now in the middle of figuring out how all of these will put together, come out, how the faculties are going to be, how the entire payment structure is going to be, and all those stuff. But hopefully, I'm able to launch it sometime this year here in Bangalore, for sure.
Oh, that's
So,
fantastic. I'm actually talking to a friend in Mumbai,
uh-huh.
and because we're looking at doing something with PKM on site in India. So we should have an offline conversation or an unrecorded conversation sometime. But I think that you really hit on something really important when it comes to motivation and understanding people. So I run these online PKM workshops. I've never had anybody say this was useless. Seriously, I've never had anyone saying, I didn't like this or anything like that. But what I've had a lot of people do, and this is a significant percentage, say, well, I didn't have time to do it. I mean, I run this over 60 days. It used to be 40 days, and I extended it to 60 days, the same amount of work, because people said they didn't have time. And, there's the saying, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink. And I think that forcing people to get out of their routine and putting them in a place is a really good thing. And that's why, we travel, and because we're away from home and the distractions, we're actually more open, and we might learn something, and we might be able to relax or do things like that. So that is, yeah, the discipline of PKM is doing something regularly, and it takes time to do that. So getting people there's one reason people sign up for courses at a university or at a school, because they know they have to go there. Oh, it's Tuesday night, I have to go to my class, right? It forces you in, okay, I've committed to do that. But if I just say, well, read these 18 articles and get back to me when you're ready, 2 months later, say, well, I really haven't had time to do that or anything like that. So what you're doing is that you're helping people, you're giving them an artificial constraint, And that I think is really good. You've created boundaries, and that within those boundaries, then there is flexibility. But I think that bounded space it definitely will help, and I think that appeals to a lot of people.
So that actually lets me segue into the online workshop that you do. So can you tell a little bit about the workshop, how you run it, whom is it useful for, so that my audience can explore whether it makes sense for them as well.
So I started off with the PKM. Are we still on? Because I've lost the video.
Yeah, you can go on.
Okay, good. So I started the first course that I did on PKM came through because I was contacted by someone who was reading my blog. They said, "Could you run a workshop on this?" And so I did. It was a private day. It was one day, and people said, "Hey, this is pretty cool. This is fun." And then I was approached by the University of Toronto. It was called their iSchool, and I ran one-day workshops. People would sign up for them. I'd fly up to Toronto. I'd run the workshop. But what I noticed afterwards was that it was a data dump, really. Is that so? I said, "This is how you do this, and this, and all these kinds of things." And we did some interactive activities, but there was a lot of stuff. And what I found was that people liked it. I got good, initial feedback, but it didn't change anybody's behavior. So the idea of doing it online came from friends of mine in the Netherlands who ran a program called Getting Online in 40 Days. And it was, how do you actually use the internet, browsers and stuff like that? And it was 18 lessons distributed over 40 days. So it was 3 lessons a week sent to you by email, actually. And each lesson was 60 to 90 minutes worth of work. Okay, we want you to do this, 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 and this, bang. And then reflect on it, and we'll get back on the next one. So they said, why don't you use this format for PKM? And so I went and I designed 18 activities over 40 days, and I ran a number of these workshops. And so really what it is, it's you get a concept. So there's 6 themes. So one of the themes is networks and communities. And one of the first exercise is mapping your network, and then getting feedback on how to map your network. And then how do you find a community is another one of the exercises. And we work our way through it. And hopefully at the end of the term, initially at 40 days, people will be ready to start. It's not this, you're not at the end, you're just getting ready to start. After about 2 years of doing this on 40 days, I had a lot of people asked to do the workshop again. And for your listeners, I don't advertise this publicly, but I can say it in public, is that anybody who wants to take the workshop again for free, I let them. Right? With the condition of, could you please participate more this time? And I shifted it to 60 days just because I had such a high non-completion rate. And even with 60 days, it's still not enough. And so I'm realizing it, but I'm not going to make it any longer. And so the idea is push through. So the workshop itself, I run 4 public ones a year. I also do private ones or custom ones if people want. But the public workshops, I have people from pretty well every walk of life. I have early career, mid-career, late career, people inside companies, freelancers. I had a lot of people who are looking at career transition. And really, because the objective of the workshop is to help you figure out how to take control of your professional development. That's really what it brings, and particularly using internet, social media types of tools to do that, and to do it at a relatively inexpensive way. So you're not taking a course or anything. You're taking my course or my workshop, because I don't even call it a course. I don't give certification for it. And for me, I said, is that that PKM is working if it's working for you. So are you actually doing something different out of this? And the great thing about the international cohorts is that, so I just started one last week. I have 20 people in it from about 10 different countries. And the great thing about doing it socially is everybody's together and you're seeing what other people are posting, which kind of forces you to say, well, I better write something because that other person did. But you're getting it from perspectives outside your company, outside your culture, outside your language. And so that international aspect for me is really important. So again, usually they average at around 20-ish people running through it. And I get some people who are 100% lurkers. I get other people who just dive right deep into it. And again, is that I don't try to push anybody. I'm there to provide it. We run some synchronous sessions like this if people want it. And anyway, they've been popular. I keep it's there in perpetual beta. So every time that I run one, the next one there's been some tweaks
Better.
to it.
Yeah.
Well, no, better, worser, something.
Yes. You learn
Different.
and make it different. Yeah. So
Yes,
based on
definitely.
whatever you've learned. So cool. So where can people find out more information about these workshops?
Okay, so the best place to go is my website, so jarche.com, jarche.com. There's a section there on PKM, the different workshops. Pretty well, all of the information is free. I have a category called PK Mastery on my blog. There are several hundred articles there. If you just want to read through it, go ahead. It's free, right? You can take the workshop if and sign up for them. You can buy. I have some ebooks. They're available, so that's another cheaper way of doing it. You can just follow me for a while and see what I'm writing and posting about. So it's all pretty well. Everything is centered through the blog, or you can always. And I'm active on Twitter as well.
Super. So before we kind of end the conversation, as we're getting close to the time that we have, a few questions that we always ask our guests. First one is there a resource or a piece of art or a book or something that you want our listeners to go check out, which has had an impact on you personally?
Yeah, there are a number of books that I feel are really well aligned with PK Mastery. And again, in my own practice is that I write book reviews. And the reason I do it is to force myself to remember what the book was about. But now I have, so that's I seek the book, I make sense of the book. I only write positive book reviews. If I don't like the book, it doesn't get a review because the review is for me. I want to remember the books that I liked and I read. And then I post them on my blog and I share them appropriately. So here with PKM, it's like, okay, Harold, can you recommend some books or some different things? Is that I actually have it up here on my site as I have my books, right? And I know which ones recently really made a difference. If you're interested in complexity, and I just read one by called "It's Not Complicated." I really enjoyed that one, and I can want me to send you the links.
Yeah, that'll be nice. Yeah,
okay, I'll do that. There's another really short one that I really liked by Benedict Carey called "How We Learn." And I learned a lot. It's focused a bit more on how we learn when we take courses and how we learn in educational settings, but it's definitely related to PKM. Another one, I'll give you the three, is called Sensemaking and the Power of the Humanities by Christian Masbjerg. And I really like that one because that focuses on the sense-making part, right, which is the tough part of PKM. And those three, and I'll send you the links to all three.
Super. And one last question that we end all our conversations is the show is called Pushing Beyond the Obvious. So what is so obvious to you but find people miss all the time?
The obvious part is that I can explain PKM to anybody and they get it. Seek, sense, share. All right. I just run through that. The non-obvious is that unless you actually work at it, it's a discipline, is that nothing is going to change. You are not going to change unless you actually do something about it. And I find that with when I work with companies, is that they say, well, we want you to run this workshop and do this, and then things are going to change. I say, they're not going to change. When I work with companies in terms of like what they call having digitally literate employees or whatever the term that they have, I say this is a minimum of a 6-month engagement, and it's going to take more than 6 months to change behavior. And because if you think about that, that's a no-brainer, but no one wants to accept that when we're focused on the next quarter. So yeah, there's blood, sweat, and tears. I mean, you gotta work at it.
That's a great way to end the conversation. So thanks a lot for taking time and talking to us. Please let people know where they can connect with you.
Okay, that's great. I'll follow up with links, and I hope that we have another conversation
sometime soon.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for taking time and talking to us today. Have a good day.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Pushing Beyond the Obvious. If you like the show and would like to support, please head over to iTunes or wherever you are listening to this show and rate us and write a review. Till next time, have fun.